We do seem to live in troubled times. Economic troubles, ructions in the stock market, of course, places in the world where freedom seems to be in retreat. We have the worries of global warming and climate change, and always problems having to do with human justice and the possibility of war. I think it's important to remember that all of this is taking place in the context of tremendous human progress. All you have to do is pick any decade, in any continent, anywhere else in the world, and people were more oppressed than they are today on a per capita basis. Things were worse in almost any other era. That doesn't mean we don't have to take our present problems seriously, but it does give us context in which to think about how to solve them. In my novel Earth, which I wrote back in 1989, it deals with a world coming up soon that does suffer from global warming and many other effects that people became aware of over the years since the book was published. But it also contains some predictions about problem-solving tools, some of which are starting to come into play now as we enter a new era. For example, Earth had web pages in it before there was a web. And above all, the notion of citizens all over the world conversing with each other openly, unfettered by national borders, talking to each other about possible ways to solve problems, possible methods that bypass their nations, that bypass the big corporations, that bypass the powers that be. Well, it's important that we recall what some of the old people like me remember all through the 50s and 60s and into the 70s, the notion that nuclear war might loom on the horizon at any time. People in Europe lived with the knowledge that 10,000 Soviet tanks were poised, ready to pour through the Fulda Gap at any time. This image of the mushroom clouds that might erupt, destroying all hope, plunging the world into what Carl Sagan strove to make us aware of, the possibility of nuclear winter, that human beings might, through their own actions and carelessness, plunge the planet into an ice age. This sense of dread of losing everything in a beautiful civilization led in part to my novel, The Postman. But you'll notice what I just said. I said losing a beautiful civilization. Sometimes we fret so much, we are so obsessed with the creative act of criticism, of wanting to denounce errors, which I consider to be the greatest pastime of human beings. Criticism is the only known antidote to error. That's an aphorism I've been spreading on the internet since there was an internet. But it's important to remember the goal. We are criticizing so that we won't lose civilization. It's important for us to remember, each of us, I am a member of a civilization, and an unusual one. If you were to go back in time to any era, pick a random decade, pick a random continent, you would find people being oppressed more than today, and by the old enemies of freedom. Not so much bureaucrats as feudalists, those who had made sure they stayed on top of a pyramidal social order, oppressing everybody beneath. Every single place on earth where human beings discovered metallurgy and agriculture, big men picked up metal implements and took other men's women and wheat. It happened everywhere until the Western Enlightenment started taking off, and we discovered the power of individualism, the power of freedom, the power of reciprocal accountability, our ability to hold each other accountable. Now we find ourselves in a situation in which our very notion of being able to solve problems is under question. Can we solve problems? Can we do anything about the problems that we face? One of the things that's discussed is called renunciation. The notion that we can only deal with the future, with the problems of technology, by renunciating, by renouncing technology, by saying, enough, let's live simpler lives, let's do without. To an extent this is true, and to an extent it's terribly unwise. The world's people are going to want to live middle-class lives. They're going to want what you and I have. They're going to want decent, clean homes with showers and dishwashers. They're going to want all the electronic devices. They're going to want cars. The trick is, how can we get them a basic middle-class lifestyle vastly more efficiently than Americans got it? If a family in China, a family in Mongolia, a family in Africa can live a decent middle-class life using only 5% of the resources that it takes an average American to live such a life, then we'll make it. Why do I have confidence that we can solve these problems? I won't cite the moon landings. That was a stunt. But the fact that we did not use nuclear weapons when we had them, the first time in human history that a new weapon arrived and wasn't embraced and used as much as people could possibly use it, for the first time, people burned their fingers on something and said, we'd better be more careful. And we were. For the first time, a world community examined and criticized its own bad mental habits, habits that were rife in every human generation, habits of racism, sexism, assumptions about people from different classes or genders. And we allowed those assumptions to control what individuals were allowed to try to do. We now know that that is evil and it is stupid, because it denies our markets, it denies our nations, it denies our networks the full supply of vigorous competitors and vigorous citizens that makes for a vibrant nation, that makes for a creative market, that makes for exciting, fun citizenship. We're the first people in human history who noticed the environmental harm that we're doing. Of course, we're doing far more than any other generation. So I'm not saying that everything is hunky-dory, but we have created a world middle class just in the last 30 to 50 years. Very soon, the world middle class, by modest standards, will outnumber the poor almost everywhere in the world. People who have a decent home with showers, with washing machines, and the ability to transport themselves and the ability to send their kids to school. This is an incredible accomplishment. It was brought about by means that I'll talk about elsewhere. In Asia, there's a lot of preening and pride over their mercantilist trade programs, trade-based growth, and they don't pay any attention to the fact that this whole system was set up by George Marshall at the end of World War II. But I want to put this in an important context. I'm involved in the search for extraterrestrial intelligence, and we don't know why we have no signs of alien life out there. One possible explanation is that when faced with the choice between ambitious problem solving and renouncing the technologies that seemed scary, that they chose renunciation instead of ambition.